Stan Laurel was one of the most iconic comedic figures of the 20th century. His bowler hat, slow blinks, and bumbling charm made millions laugh around the world. But behind that gentle smile and lighthearted persona lay a man whose real life was far more complex than his on-screen roles. From his meteoric rise to fame to the chaotic twists in his personal life, Stan's journey was filled with both triumphs and heartbreak. And in the end, his final days with his wife tell a story many still don't know. This is the hidden life of Stan Laurel, where comedy masks something deeper. Stan Laurel wasn't born into fame. In fact, his story began in a quiet corner of England where creativity wasn't celebrated, it was expected. His father ran theaters. His mother was an actress. So from the very start, young Stan learned how to draw attention, not with noise, but with nuance. While other kids dreamed of adventure, Stan studied the rhythm of applause. By his teenage years, he was already performing comedy acts, developing the timing and expressions that would later define a generation. But what made him different was his approach. He didn't rely on over-the-top antics. His humor was in the silences, the awkward pauses, the understated reactions. He understood something many still overlook: less is often more. America came calling early, and when Stan crossed the ocean, he brought with him a quiet storm of talent. He worked hard, took gigs others turned down, and earned respect in vaudeville long before Hollywood opened its doors. He was more than just an actor. He was a creator. Someone who shaped the entire structure of what made people laugh without ever needing to raise his voice. But his story truly changed the day he met Oliver Hardy. At first, it was just one film, one small experiment. But when those two appeared on screen together, something clicked. It wasn't just chemistry, it was destiny. They didn't plan to become a duo. It just happened. By the late 1920s, Laurel and Hardy were a sensation. Film after film, they delivered timeless comedy that still holds up nearly a century later. But even as their fame exploded, Stan was working behind the scenes, writing, directing, editing, controlling the details down to a frame. He was obsessed with getting everything just right. And that obsession came with a price. Few knew the hours he put in, the arguments behind closed doors, the long nights when he'd rewrite scenes after everyone else had gone home. Stan wasn't chasing fame, he was chasing perfection. And while the audience saw a light-hearted performer, the man behind the screen was burning himself out. At the height of his success, Stan seemed untouchable. But success has a way of amplifying personal demons. As the world laughed at his every pratfall and puzzled expression, no one could guess what was going on when the cameras stopped rolling. Because for Stan Laurel, the spotlight was never just about comedy. It was also his armor. And soon, that armor would begin to crack. Behind every great performer is a storm the audience never sees. For Stan Laurel, the spotlight was both a sanctuary and a mask. While his on-screen persona charmed millions, his personal life was a whirlwind of emotional strain, failed relationships, and deep-rooted insecurity. Stan wasn't just a perfectionist in his work, he carried that into his private life, often to his own detriment. His pursuit of perfection collided head-on with the messy, unpredictable nature of real relationships. And that's where cracks began to show. He married multiple times, 6 to be exact. Some of those marriages were with the same woman. That's right. He remarried one of his ex-wives, thinking maybe the second time would be different. But the cycle repeated: passion, misunderstanding, disillusionment, and heartbreak. It wasn't that Stan didn't want love, he desperately did. He just couldn't seem to keep it once he had it. His home life was chaotic. It wasn't always private. At a time when the tabloids were just beginning to dig into celebrity lives, Laurel's name popped up more than once. Public spats, legal troubles, financial strains. It was a far cry from the gentle fool he portrayed on screen. But Stan never let the cracks show to the audience. Even when things were falling apart, he'd show up to work, ready to perform. It wasn't just professionalism, it was survival. He poured himself into his craft, using comedy as both a distraction and a coping mechanism. As the years went on, and the fame started to dim slightly, the pressure intensified. Laurel and Hardy, though still beloved, found fewer opportunities in a changing Hollywood landscape. The rise of new comedic styles pushed them to the margins. And for Stan, that felt like a slow erosion of identity. He lived and breathed the partnership with Hardy, not just on screen but off. The bond they shared was unique, something forged in years of shared success, failure, and relentless work. But when Hardy's health began to decline, Stan found himself not just losing a partner, but losing half of who he was. This period of Stan's life was marked by isolation. He withdrew from the public more and more, focusing on old scripts, fan letters, and silent memories. Yet despite everything, he maintained a strange sense of loyalty to his craft, to his fans, and to the memory of what once was. Still, there was one constant in his later years, a surprising one. A woman who stuck by him, quietly, while the rest of the world moved on. She wasn't part of the act. She didn't care about the spotlight. But she would play a role in the most mysterious and heartbreaking chapter of Stan Laurel's life. And that chapter was only just beginning. By the time Stan Laurel reached the twilight of his life, his career had slowed, the lights had dimmed, and most of the world had moved on to newer stars. Yet, in the quiet spaces between the headlines and the laughter, one relationship quietly bloomed, and it was unlike any he had before. This woman wasn't drawn to Stan because of the fame or the iconic status he carried. In fact, she often preferred to stay far from spotlight. Where others sought attention, she offered presence. Where many demanded more from Stan, she gave simplicity, stability, and something he hadn't known in years, peace. They weren't a glamorous couple by Hollywood standards. There were no red carpet appearances, no high society galas. Their love was private, rooted in shared routines and quiet conversations. She was there when he needed her most, when the world seemed to forget and the industry that once praised him offered silence. And through all that, she stayed. To those close to him, she was a grounding force. Stan, known for his emotional fragility and deep-seated insecurities, seemed more balanced with her around. Friends described her as patient and devoted. She would cook for him, care for him during health scares, and listen to the stories he still told about the golden days of Laurel and Hardy. But here's where things take a strange turn. For all the stability she brought, there was something mysterious about her. Unlike Stan's previous wives or lovers, very little was known publicly about her past. She kept details vague, avoided media attention, and didn't speak much about her life before Stan. This secrecy sparked quiet curiosity, but Stan, usually a man of detail and control, never seemed to mind. He trusted her completely. Still, behind closed doors, some of Stan's friends raised subtle concerns. She had slowly taken over more than just the day-to-day caretaking. She managed his medications, filtered his visitors, and handled his correspondence. Some even suggested she'd started screening his fan mail and financial affairs. Stan, however, didn't see the red flags. To him, it felt like love. As his health declined further, she became his sole companion. Their bond, though unconventional and mostly hidden from public view, appeared unbreakable. Stan no longer traveled, rarely accepted interviews, and lived mostly in quiet retreat. His days of comedic genius were behind him, replaced by the routine of aging and memory. But even in those quiet days, something felt off to those who knew him best. Stan, once expressive and full of stories, had become quieter. His eyes, once bright with energy, seemed tired, guarded even. When people did visit, they noticed she never left his side, not even for a moment. Why did she keep such a firm hold on his life? Was it pure care or something else? No one could say for sure. But in those final years, as Stan Laurel slowly disappeared from public life, the mystery surrounding his last companion only deepened. And what came next would send quiet shockwaves through everyone who had ever loved the man behind the laughter. In the final stretch of Stan Laurel's life, things took a peculiar turn. While the world outside continued spinning, Stan's once predictable routine began showing signs of something deeply unusual. Those who had remained in contact, friends, distant relatives, old colleagues, began noticing that their calls were rarely answered, their letters often returned, and if they did manage to reach Stan, the conversations felt guarded, filtered. The woman by his side, still unnamed to the public, claimed Stan was simply tired, that his health was fading, and that he needed peace and quiet. But many felt something didn't add up. Stan had always been a man who cherished connection, even in his older years. Fans who had written to him often received handwritten notes back, full of warmth and nostalgia. Now those responses stopped entirely. It wasn't just old age. It felt like a wall had gone up around him. Even more concerning, a few visitors reported that when they did see Stan, he seemed more withdrawn than ever. He smiled less. He spoke softly, sometimes barely above a whisper. It was as if he was always being listened to or watched. Some described his demeanor as timid, which was unusual even for a man known to be gentle and reserved. Then came the financial questions. Stan's estate, while not extravagant by Hollywood standards, was still significant. Residuals, royalties, personal savings, memorabilia, all worth protecting. Yet, some of those close to him began suspecting that decisions were being made on his behalf, without his full awareness or consent. It said that certain assets were quietly sold off, while others mysteriously vanished. Yet no legal action was taken, and no public allegations were made. Everything happened in whispers. Then came the day the news broke. Stan Laurel had passed away peacefully in his Santa Monica apartment. The obituary was brief, clean, and oddly impersonal. No major statements from family. No grand tribute. Just a line or two about his passing and a short acknowledgement of his impact on comedy. But perhaps what struck most people wasn't the lack of fanfare. It was the lack of closure. There was no memorial service open to fans or the public. No known will was publicly released. No one, it seemed, had a complete understanding of what had happened in those final years. The woman who had become his closest companion vanished almost entirely from the public eye. No interviews. No statements. Nothing. Whispers began to spread. Was Stan isolated on purpose? Was he truly aware of the decisions being made in his name? And why did it seem like so much had been scrubbed from view so quickly after his passing? To some, it felt like a carefully orchestrated fade-out, one designed not to celebrate a legend, but to quietly remove him from the world without too many questions. But those questions still lingered, and the deeper people looked, the more troubling the answers seemed to become. And what surfaced next would challenge everything we thought we knew about Stan Laurel's final days. Months after Stan Laurel's passing, a quiet storm began to brew, not in headlines, but in private circles. A former assistant of Laurel's, now retired and living in Arizona, claimed to have found something unexpected while sorting through boxes of memorabilia Stan had gifted her decades earlier. Tucked away between old scripts and yellowing photos were letters, handwritten by Stan himself, many of which had never been seen by the public. What made these letters strange wasn't just their content, it was the tone. Stan had always been reflective, even sentimental. But these messages hinted at a man grappling with something more profound: regret, loneliness, and confusion. One letter reportedly described feeling like a ghost in his own home, as if life was moving around him without him truly being part of it. Another note mentioned being surrounded by people who smile but never truly see me. Was this poetic musing? Or was Stan subtly expressing something deeper, something more troubling? It was clear he wasn't writing for public attention. These were private thoughts, possibly never intended to be read by anyone but himself or a few close friends. What caught even more attention were references in the letters to the arrangement. Though he never explained what this meant directly, he alluded to having agreed to things I wouldn't have before and trusting someone who now keeps me further away from the world. Again, no names were mentioned, but the subtext raised eyebrows. Was Stan manipulated in his vulnerable years? Was someone influencing his decisions and controlling access to him? Adding to the intrigue, several letters included drafts of unsent responses to old comedy partners, especially Oliver Hardy's family. In one, Stan apologized for not keeping the promise to ensure a tribute film would be completed. That project had quietly vanished years earlier, without explanation. Could it be that someone deliberately shut it down? These personal writings weren't all dark. Some celebrated memories of vaudeville days, the simple joy of laughter, and a wish that the world would remember the humor, not just the act. But overall, the tone painted a picture of a man who felt sidelined during the most delicate chapter of his life. Meanwhile, rumors swirled about the woman who had become Stan's mysterious companion. Some speculated she had legal power over his estate. Others whispered that she had erased parts of Stan's legacy intentionally, perhaps fearing something in his past, or hers, might come to light if the spotlight lingered too long after his death. Fans and researchers alike began to wonder if the world had accepted too quickly the version of events they were told. Was Stan Laurel's final chapter rewritten before it was ever truly understood? And just when it seemed like the mystery couldn't go deeper, an unexpected piece of information surfaced that forced everyone to re-examine the entire story from the beginning. For months, the rumors surrounding Stan Laurel's final days had swirled into a storm of mystery and speculation. Letters that hinted at regret, whispers about secret arrangements, and a woman whose identity remained oddly elusive. It all seemed to point towards something sinister. Fans were left with a haunting picture. Had one of comedy's most beloved icons died under questionable circumstances? But here's where everything takes a turn. As the noise reached a peak, an independent biographer, who had worked on Laurel and Hardy retrospectives for years, stepped forward to address the speculation. This researcher, long respected among classic film historians, had spent decades interviewing people close to Laurel, reviewing archives, and even gaining limited access to the so-called hidden letters. After months of silence, she spoke up, and what she shared changed everything. According to her, much of the recent chatter had been blown wildly out of proportion. Yes, the letters were real, but they weren't confessions of fear or manipulation. They were drafts of unfinished thoughts from a man deep in reflection during his twilight years. Stan Laurel was known for keeping notes, writing mock speeches, jokes, and even poetic ramblings to keep his mind sharp. Many of these writings were deeply personal, but they weren't cries for help. They were, in essence, the ramblings of an old soul processing the end of a very public life in private. As for the mysterious woman who had appeared in his later years, her name was Audrey Meadows, not the actress, but a caretaker and close family friend who had known the Laurels for decades. She wasn't a legal guardian, nor was she given control of his estate. In fact, she had helped preserve his archives and worked to keep his memory alive. The arrangement mentioned in the letters? That phrase, it turned out, referred to a mutual decision made by Stan and his family to avoid the public spotlight as his health declined. After years of being recognized on the street, approached by strangers, and watched constantly by fans, Stan had asked for peace. His family honored that request. There was no conspiracy, just a choice to let a man die with dignity and privacy. The tribute film that had disappeared was shelved not due to sabotage, but budget issues and creative differences among producers. And the old assistant who discovered the letters? She had genuinely found them, but her interpretation, however well-meaning, was influenced by her distance from the full context. In the end, Stan Laurel's death wasn't surrounded by darkness or scandal. It was marked by quiet reflection, loving support, and a conscious retreat from fame. Sometimes the truth isn't as dramatic as we want it to be, but it's no less meaningful. Stan Laurel didn't die forgotten or controlled. He left this world on his own terms, with his wit intact and his legacy secure. And maybe that's the most powerful ending of all. Stan Laurel gave the world laughter, joy, and a timeless legacy that continues to inspire comedians and entertainers to this day. While rumors and speculation try to cloud the truth, the real story is far more powerful. A man who chose peace, privacy, and dignity in his final chapter. His humor may have come from simple moments, but his impact was anything but small. As we remember Stan, let's honor not just the legend, but the man behind the smile. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more untold stories that deserve to be heard.